All right, let's dive right into this explainer tailored specifically for your CMA exam prep. We're zeroing in on the foundational concepts of strategic management. Now, if you're studying for the CMA, you already know that strategy isn't just some corporate buzzword, right? It is a critical, highly testable framework. So we're going to break down exactly what you need to know, sticking strictly to the core source material to make sure you are absolutely prepared to crush this. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at defining strategic management, measuring competitive advantage, strategic positioning and trade-offs, the role of managers in strategy execution, and finally, corporate governance and ethics. Okay, Section 1, Defining Strategic Management. You know, it's incredibly easy to just casually throw the word strategy around in a meeting to sound smart, but for the CMA exam, we need absolute precision. You've got to lock in this definition. Strategy is essentially a set of goal-directed actions a firm takes to gain and sustain superior performance relative to its competitors. At the end of the day, it's about competing for resources to achieve that superior performance. A strategy is really only considered good when it actually makes that happen. It's not just about making a great public statement. It is about directed, highly specific action. Now pay close attention to the rule of 3 here, because a true strategy must always contain these 3 elements: a diagnosis, a guiding policy, and coherent actions. Think about it. Without diagnosing the actual competitive challenge, your policy is totally blind, and without a set of coherent actions to actually implement it, well, your guiding policy is just an empty wish. The exam is definitely going to test your understanding of strategy as this complete 3-part package. And please do not fall for this trick on your exam. It is so easy to confuse functional, everyday departmental initiatives with a comprehensive competitive strategy. People casually refer to their IT plans or HR or marketing as a strategy. And sure, while they definitely support the overarching goal, they are merely functional initiatives. They are completely necessary, but on their own, they are simply not sufficient to achieve a true competitive advantage. Moving right along to Section 2, Measuring Competitive Advantage. So, having a strategy is one thing, but proving it actually works is a whole different ballgame. You might be wondering, how does a firm actually know if its strategy is succeeding out there in the real world? How do we put a firm metric on that success and actually assess competitive advantage?
Well, the absolutely crucial point here is this. Competitive advantage is always relative, not absolute. It's always measured relative to a benchmark. Think other firms in the exact same industry, or the overall industry average. You can't just look at a company's raw profit in a vacuum and declare, hey, they have a competitive advantage. You always have to ask, compared to whom?
When we look at the 2 opposite ends of the spectrum, the distinction becomes super clear. If a firm achieves superior performance relative to other competitors or the industry average, boom, you have a competitive advantage. But if a firm underperforms compared to its rivals or that industry average, then it's operating at a competitive disadvantage. Pretty straightforward, right? Now, make sure you memorize these 2 distinct states for your test. If 2 or more firms are performing at the exact same level, they have what's called competitive parity. They're basically tied. But the holy grail, the thing every single firm is desperately seeking, is that sustainable competitive advantage. And the key word there is sustainable, meaning you're not just a flash in the pan. You are outperforming your competitors or the industry average over a prolonged period. All right, Section 3, Strategic Positioning and Trade-offs. Now that we know how to measure advantage, we really have to look at the tough choices required to actually achieve it. And this brings us to a profound realization. Strategy is as much about deciding what not to do as it is about deciding what to do. Clear strategic positioning requires a company to make distinct trade-offs. For example, balancing value creation against the costs required to create that value. You just cannot have everything. An effective strategy demands that these trade-offs be explicitly recognized and addressed. The reality here is that resources are always limited. They're finite. So managers have to combine a specific set of activities to stick out a unique strategic position within their industry. This means competitive advantage has to come from either performing different activities from your rivals or performing those exact same activities in a completely different way. And ideally, these activities should reinforce one another rather than creating even more trade-offs internally. Because here is the brutal truth. Trying to be everything to everybody will likely result in inferior performance. You'll just stretch your limited resources way too thin. Remember, things like operational effectiveness, marketing skills, all that functional expertise, they definitely strengthen a unique strategic position. but they absolutely do not substitute for a competitive strategy. You have to make the hard choices about who you are not serving. That brings us to Section 4, Managers in Strategy Execution. Strategy isn't just some fancy document that lives exclusively in a boardroom. It requires active execution across the whole company. Top management doesn't operate in a vacuum. Middle and lower-level managers are literally the critical linchpins here. They have to work strictly within the organization's overarching strategy, meeting objectives while observing all those strategic constraints we just talked about. But more than that, they have to communicate it. The more convincingly these managers interpret and communicate the strategy to their teams, the greater the performance they're going to drive. Plus, they increasingly play a huge part in actually shaping future strategy from the ground up. And finally, Section 5, Corporate Governance and Ethics. We're wrapping up this explainer by zooming out to look at the essential guardrails that protect everything we've just learned about competitive advantage. Notice how corporate governance and business ethics are so closely intertwined. It's like a giant puzzle. Ethics sets the right organizational core values based on societal norms, while governance provides the actual mechanisms, the checks and balances, to ensure strict compliance. They have to work together perfectly. For your exam, make sure you tie corporate governance directly to solving the principal-agent problem. It's a system of mechanisms focusing on monitoring, controlling, and providing incentives. Corporate governance is all about directing and controlling an enterprise to make absolutely sure that it pursues its strategic goals not just successfully, but legally. It's about asking the tough questions at exactly the right time, and it requires strategic leaders who act with pure integrity. And speaking of integrity, let's talk about business ethics. While business practices and standards obviously differ to some degree in different cultures around the globe, a massive amount of research shows that some specific notions are actually universal norms. We're talking about fairness, honesty, and reciprocity. These lay the foundation for strategic leaders. And because they're so universally agreed upon, many of these values are often codified directly into law. So, to wrap this all up, outperforming your rivals requires way more than just a plan. It requires coherent action, making really hard trade-offs, and brilliant execution at all levels. But as a future CMA, you've got to remember that every bit of this relies on an unwavering commitment to integrity. Think deeply about how fragile a strategic position truly is. If competitive advantage is purely relative, how quickly could a single ethical failure completely tank your sustainable advantage and turn it into a competitive disadvantage?
Today, we are locking down some absolute foundational concepts. We're going to help you escape a major conceptual trap regarding law and ethics that catches a lot of people off guard, and will completely break down the strategy hierarchy so you can walk into test day with total confidence. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. Number 1, law versus ethics. 2, the origins of strategy. 3, characteristics of strategic decisions. 4, consequences of strategy. And finally, 5, the strategy hierarchy. Section 1, Law versus Ethics, the exam trap.
So this right here is a classic area where students tend to lose points on the exam because they accidentally merge two concepts that are actually completely distinct. I want you to really think about this. If a manager's action is totally, 100% legal, does that automatically make it ethical? There's this huge public misconception out there that the law and ethics are just synonymous. But as future management accountants, we have to look a bit deeper than that to define the absolute floor of acceptable behavior.
Now, what's really interesting about this comparison is the direct contrast. You see, staying within the law, that is literally just the minimum acceptable standard of behavior. It's the absolute baseline. Ethics, on the other hand, represents a much higher standard of moral reasoning. The law tells you what you are technically allowed to do, but ethics asks what you actually should do.
Because of this, a major note of caution is in order for your exam. Remember this quote. Law and ethics, however, are not synonymous. A manager's actions can be completely legal but ethically questionable. You can follow the law to the absolute letter, check every single legal box, and yet still violate ethical standards. Never forget that distinction.
Section 2, the origins of strategy from battlefield to boardroom.
Now let's shift gears from ethical boundaries to how businesses actually plan to win. This concept actually has its origins way back around 500 BC with Sun Tzu's The Art of War. That is widely regarded as the very first methodical documentation on strategy. The actual word itself was born in ancient Greece, strategeia, which meant generalship. So while today's managers aren't exactly wearing armor or wielding swords, the modern corporate battlefield is the market. And the sole objective of a strategy? It's still exactly the same, to provide a competitive advantage to the organization. Which leads us to our formal definition. Strategy is the direction and scope of an organization over the long term, which achieves advantage through the configuration of resources within a changing environment to fulfill stakeholder expectations. So the crucial point is, it's all about matching what you have internally, your resources and competences, to the external environment over a long time horizon, all while keeping your stakeholders happy, of course. It really provides that basic framework for an organization to actually achieve its mission.
Section 3. Characteristics of strategic decisions, the core traits.
To fully grasp strategy for the exam, you really need to understand its defining traits. First, strategy is always concerned with the long-term direction of an organization. Because you're aiming to achieve an advantage over the competition, you have to relate this to the entire scope of your activities. It's essentially about matching your resources and activities to a constantly shifting environment. But it doesn't stop there. Strategy inherently stretches an organization's resources and competencies to create new opportunities, which means it may require some major resource changes. And because it's so massive in scale, it trickles all the way down to affect everyday operational decisions. Plus, all of this is heavily influenced by the values and expectations of the stakeholders who actually have power in and around the company.
Section 4. Consequences of strategy. The ripple effect.
And this brilliantly illustrates our next point. Because strategic decisions are long-term, because they stretch resources and relate to the entire scope of the business, they trigger some direct, unavoidable consequences. Step 1. High complexity. They are incredibly complex by nature. Step 2. Situations of uncertainty. You're trying to predict the future, right? So uncertainty is just a given. Step 3. It demands an integrated approach. You can't just tackle this in a silo. You have to manage relationships and networks outside the organization. And finally, Step 4. It involves major organizational change. You literally can't execute a massive new strategy without fundamentally changing things within the organization.
Section 5. The strategy hierarchy, corporate to functional.
All right, let's get to the climax of this explainer. Businesses don't just have one single strategy. They have a layered system. At the very top, we have corporate strategy. This is the broadest level. It's concerned with the overall purpose and scope of the organization, like making decisions about diversification, vertical integration, acquisitions, and how to allocate resources between different business units. Moving one level down, we hit business strategy. This is all about competing successfully in particular markets and improving the competitive position of specific products or services. And finally, on the ground floor, we have functional or operational level strategy. This is laser-focused on how the component parts of the organization actually deliver effectively on those higher-level strategies by maximizing resource productivity through processes and people.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because organizations don't just pick one of these and call it a day. They actually use all three types simultaneously. We use the term hierarchy of strategy to explain the nesting of one strategy within another. They complement and support each other. Functional strategies support business strategies, which in turn support the corporate strategy. It's this beautiful, tightly woven, supportive hierarchy. So let's tie this whole explainer together with a question. If we know that legal isn't always ethical, and we know that functional strategies absolutely must support corporate strategies, are your daily functional operations truly supporting an ethical, overarching corporate strategy? Think about it. If your corporate strategy is legally compliant but ethically flawed, a highly efficient functional strategy is just flawlessly executing a bad premise. Keep that holistic, big-picture view in mind. If you're gearing up for your CMA exam, you've absolutely heard of red and blue oceans, right? Well, today, we're unpacking Solved Case 1 from the strategic management materials. We're going to figure out exactly what definitions and characteristics you need to completely master this topic. Let's get to it.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover the market space concept, then how to survive the red ocean and creating a blue ocean. After that, we'll hit the strategy comparison matrix, and finally, wrap things up with an exam prep summary.
Starting off with Section 1, the market space concept, where we define the competitive environment.
Moving right along to Section 2, surviving the red ocean, also known as the known market space.
Okay, here's a critical definition you really need to lock in. A red ocean represents literally all the industries currently in existence today. Think of it as the known market space. In a red ocean, industry boundaries are completely defined and accepted by everyone. The competitive rules of the game? Yeah, everybody knows them. Now, quick exam note for you. If you spot the phrase known market space or defined boundaries on a multiple choice question, you are immediately dealing with a red ocean.
no question. So what's it actually like in this concentrated market space? Well, the main goal for any company here is simply to outperform its rivals, just to grab a bigger chunk of the existing demand. And as that space gets more and more crowded, your prospects for profits and growth shrink pretty fast. Products kind of just devolve into mere commodities, or they get squeezed into tiny niches. It's a really brutal setup, which is exactly why it's called a red ocean. That cutthroat competition for the exact same customers literally turns the waters bloody. So yeah, it's an incredibly risky place for a new startup to jump into.
A classic example from the source text is the automobile industry. Just think about all those different car companies out there. They're fiercely battling each other, using totally traditional competitive methods, all trying to solve the exact same problem and capture the exact same pool of existing consumer demand.
Now this brings us to the ultimate strategic pivot. If a red ocean strategy is entirely focused on exploiting existing demand, what's the alternative? Well, it's the blue ocean strategy. This shifts the paradigm entirely away from fighting over current customers toward creating brand new demand from scratch.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, creating a blue ocean, or the uncontested market space.
The whole concept of the blue ocean strategy was first coined by W.Tian Kim and René Mauberger back in their 2004 book. According to them, blue oceans denote all the industries which currently do not exist. We're talking about a landscape that remains totally unexplored, unknown, and completely untainted by competition. Here's another crucial exam note for you. Always, always associate Kim and Mauberger with the creation of uncontested market spaces. It's the place where existing competition basically just becomes completely irrelevant.
Notice the massive shift in how growth is actually achieved here. In a blue ocean, you aren't fighting over demand at all, you're creating it. You're bringing a totally new product or service to life to solve an existing problem, but using new trends. And because it's an unoccupied, unknown market, there's just ample opportunity for growth that is both incredibly profitable and really fast. By focusing heavily on unprecedented value and innovation, your competition, well, they're not even in the same waters.
All right, moving on to Section 4, the Strategy Comparison Matrix. Consider this your ultimate CMA study guide.
To really visualize how these two stack up, we can look directly at the contrast between these strategic focuses from our source text. Let's break this down.
Okay, listen up, because these contrasts are pure gold for exam day. Where red oceans focus on current customers, blue oceans focus on non-customers. Red oceans compete in existing markets. Blue oceans create uncontested markets to serve. Red oceans try to beat the competition. Blue oceans, they make the competition irrelevant. Red oceans exploit existing demand, while blue oceans create and capture new demand. Now pay super close attention to these last 2 points. A red ocean strategy forces a firm to make the value-cost trade-off. That means aligning their whole system to choose either differentiation or low cost. But a blue ocean strategy, it breaks that value-cost trade-off. They align their activities to pursue differentiation and low cost simultaneously. Seriously, memorize those exact distinctions.
Finally, Section 5, our exam prep summary, featuring the key takeaways for the CMA.
So the absolute crucial point to lock into your memory from this text is the phrase Reconstructionist view, because the blue ocean market pays so much attention to the combined aspects of value and innovation. Kim and Malborn refer to this as a Reconstructionist view. Basically, it's the strategic mindset that market boundaries and industry structures aren't just given facts. They can actually be fundamentally reconstructed by the actions and beliefs of the players in the industry.
I'll leave you with this final thought as you hit the books for your prep. When you step into the role of a strategic manager, how will you identify which ocean your future business is swimming in? And more importantly, what strategy are you ultimately going to choose to not just survive, but to truly thrive? Good luck with your studies, and keep that strategy sharp.